If you like what we do here at Off the Deep End and wish to support us, the best thing you can do is to share it on your social media, but also you can tell your mother, sister, cousin, auntie, the kid that's walking by you down the street, your gym crush, anybody about the episode you're listening to and why you liked it. There's also another way to support us, and it's to go to the link posted in the description and on our Facebook page. And when you become a subscriber, you'll have access to subscriber-only content and ad-free listening for every single episode we put out. No matter what you choose to do, I do greatly appreciate you for tapping in, and please do reach out to our Facebook page so we can chat. Tell us what you feel, what you think, what you don't like, what I could improve upon. At the end of the day, this is meant to be a conversation starter. And just to be completely open and honest, every single penny that goes to the Off the Deep End program with subscribers is going to help other people by spreading the word via ads or getting new microphones so we can have more people at a time. And I really do appreciate every single listener. So thank you so much. I hope you have a great day and don't pass the pain. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for our episode of Off the Deep End. This is going to be a very important topic to me. Active shooters is something that's traumatized and destroyed pieces of my family, and it is something that I'm super passionate about. How we can effectively, as a community, respond to this. For too long, do we stand around and say, "Oh, well, it can't be done," or "It's too difficult," or the worst one I hear is, "My hands are tied." I often ask people when I meet them, "Hey, what have you heard about this crazy thing we got going on between these active shooters? It's ripping apart kids. It's horrible. Who would want to hurt kids? What is your school district doing?" And this is a conversation now I'm going to ask you as a listener. What is your school, your police, your sheriff's office, your elected officials in city council, your school board, your school district, all the way down to the teachers and the students? What are we all doing differently to stop these from happening? There are teachers right now in my area that are on strike for blocking mental health services to children. And there's not just one approach that we can take to this. I think we can take multiple. I hope you enjoy this conversation as we take a look at one of the front runners in this situation in our country and his great approach. It is a different one. It's going to be a lot of controversial things he might have to say. And I hope that you take everything he says for what it is. And please do reach out to either him or me. I'd love to have this conversation with you about how we could possibly improve and protect our kids better as a community, because the conversations I'm having, there's a lot of different ways we can do it, but nobody seems to know what their current leaders and elected officials have done. So without further ado, let's talk with Derek Sanders for Sheriff in Thurston County. Are you thinking about making a podcast? Spotify has a platform that lets you make one, and if I can figure it out, you definitely can too. You can create your own content all in one place for free with zero hangups and even earn money as soon as you get started. Spotify lets you record and edit episodes from your phone or computer so you can go mobile, just like I enjoy to do. My favorite thing about it is that you can create video episodes if you wish and upload them to wherever podcasts are heard. You can even set up subscriptions, or if you're like me, listener support options for listeners to help you grow. I 10 out of 10 recommend the Spotify for Podcasters app. Or, why don't you just step over to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started on your own podcast. Awesome. So thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Sanders. I'm super excited for the message you're going to bring today.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. So let's go right into it. What made you decide to run for office?
Oh, man, there's a whole bunch of things. So obviously I'm running against my boss. I'm a deputy sheriff. I've been here for 6 years now, 2 years with Lacey PD, non-commissioned. So a total of 8 years of law enforcement experience. But, 3 years ago, you wouldn't have found a bigger fan of my boss than me. I was super supportive, like publicly supportive. Went out of my way to just, find ways to support this guy. And, COVID hit and things changed for us big time. And you could see the morale of the deputies start to teeter. Things got difficult. We didn't have answers. The jail shut down. Basically, we're only booking violent felonies only. So we spent a lot of our time just moving people around, pushing them around instead of holding them accountable. And then that was difficult. And then we had the K9 Arlo shooting down here.
That was tough to watch.
I was in that pursuit. And we ended up having an employee who made some mistakes after the shooting. We had some some embezzlement going on. It looked like I read all the documents. It didn't look good. And we saw the sheriff basically cover that up. He terminated the investigation. I mean, the Chronicle did a huge article on it, but surprisingly, not that many people picked up on it. I mean, it kind of just got brushed under the rug. And so that disappointed me pretty big because I don't like to see cops get away with stuff that civilians wouldn't. And so when the administration thought no one was looking, that's how they acted. And so I kind of lost my faith in my administration then. And full disclosure, I was on my way out. The new laws came in. Can't chase cars, can't detain people, not going to mental health. I mean, everything was just kind of falling apart here. And so I started working on my Texas Peace Officer certification. I was about halfway done with it. At that point in time, I think we'd lost 5 deputies in 3 months. Staffing was just starting to just fall through the roof. And I'm like, I don't want to be here either. This is just too much for me. And, it's one thing, like the external stuff. You'll hear police officers say this a bunch. The external stuff, right? The violence, the call volume, dealing with mental health. That's actually all you can handle that. That's part of the job. That's what you go in expecting. It's the internal stuff that you're not prepared for that. The academy doesn't train you how to deal with poor administrations and administrations making terrible decisions despite pushback and things like that. Like they don't train you for that, right? Because that would be a hot button topic to teach at the academy is emotional survival for that kind of stuff. So they don't teach you, and so deputies are just leaving in flocks. This is the most deputies we've lost. Well, we're about to lose. I think we're at 9 now, 9 in 9 months. That's the most Thurston County's ever lost. I think the most we've ever lost before was like 2 in a year, maybe, to other departments. And so to see this many deputies leave, I was halfway through my Texas Peace Officer certification. And, I'm critical on the way out. I'm talking on the way out. I'm like, I think you're doing a terrible job. I think that, morale is low and you guys have done nothing to offer a solution. Crime's exploding. We're doing nothing to combat that. And, the message
obviously that's not going to make people in the public see things going very smoothly. And they're going to probably vocalize that as well.
Yep. And that's what they didn't like, is that my criticisms went from being internal because, they don't really care if we talk amongst ourselves, but I started complaining publicly. Like, you're doing a bad job, man. And that's coming from someone who loved you 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like, I cannot stress how much of a fan I was of John Snaza, 3 years ago. And so my criticisms became pretty big. Most recently was that state law allowed us to chase for DUI, and he just said, no, we're not going to do that. And I'm like, man, I didn't get in this job to let drunk drivers drive away from me every night.
My brother died last year of a DUI.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I just, those are the kind of things, right? We're just in, we get behind them, we turn our lights on, and not because of state law, because of department policy, we watch them drive away, and then, they crash 3 minutes later or whatever it is, right? And so on the way out, I was literally 1 foot out the door, and he says, well, if you think you can do a better job, then run for sheriff. And I'm like, you know what? Like, okay.
You got it.
Okay, you got it, right? Because my whole thing is that people are allowed to do a bad job. I'm not one of these people who every time someone does something, I just gotta attack them for it, right? But if you mess up, especially if you've made a series of consecutive bad decisions, I expect to see a humble response, not a cocky, ego-driven one. So for him to walk around and be like, well, if you think you can do a better job while this place is literally a dumpster fire rolling down the street, I'm like, no, man, you don't get to do that. And he was set to run unopposed. He was going to run unopposed for a 3rd straight term. And I'm like, no, you don't deserve that. You don't deserve that. But just based on that quote alone, to me, you don't deserve that. So that's kind of what led up to me being like, I'll run for sheriff. Like, if no one else is going to do it, and everyone's like, your career is over if you do this. And I'm like, what's the alternative, right? I mean, this place is burning to the ground. So yeah, that's what ultimately led to my bid for sheriff. It's kind of fateful, actually.
I think it definitely is. It's really important that you do vocalize however you feel, no matter what. I know way too many Leos and people in the fire districts, and a lot of people, especially in the military, who say that their occupation is holding them back from telling the truth, and that's tough to hear because true leadership, you need to have transparency, accountability, self-respect is one of the most important things because that inspires people to have that confidence in you. And if
Right.
you don't respect your subordinates or instruct your subordinates on how to carry themselves and just say, oh, well, if you could do it better than me, then you do it. That's something that Kanye West said in a rap song. And it makes
Right.
me laugh. What do you think
Right.
that's going to say to you to make other people laugh too? Probably.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I mean, again, that's just about leadership, right?
Mhm.
In fact, like it's funny because in this election, I get called immature all the time by him and his supporters. I'm immature. That's their one thing that they go back to. Like he's young, he's immature. The way he acts is immature.
Well,
And I'm
at one
like,
point, being old, usually, I remember back in the '60s, my dad used to tell me growing up, he heard the same thing, but usually it was those old people who were set in their ways, and they don't like
yeah,
change. Usually,
yep,
they like consistency. Don't nothing, as
don't
long as
rock the
nothing
boat.
better. I'm making my coffee at 9 in the morning
Yep,
after my first coffee at 5:30, and if it's not just right, I'm not going to be happy the rest of the
right.
day. Change is
Yep,
important.
yes. And so it was interesting. Like they keep calling me immature. He's immature. He doesn't know what he's doing. Blah blah blah. And they just keep going with the immature, the immature. And I'm like, this whole election started with quite possibly the most immature comment. That's what sparked this whole thing. So it's interesting, because that to me again, it's not leadership. And they can attack me, for a lack of leadership all they want, but I know it isn't. So even if you wanted to argue that I don't know what leadership is, I've never managed people, I've never ran a $50 million budget. Well, I know what leadership isn't, and it's what I'm currently seeing. So I
That's
feel
okay to
that.
say.
Yeah. So I feel
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. What's your current vision for the future of you're running obviously for Thurston County here in Washington State. What's your future vision? Like what would you ideally want to see change overall?
Well, I think um, kind of my short answer to that is that I think we can have a police department, a sheriff's office that is both competent and able to effectively deal with crime and also accountable to itself. Because you get a lot of people that like when you start talking about accountability and transparency, there are a lot of people on the political spectrum that start to immediately associate that with like a Seattle Police Department, right? Like Department of Justice overhead, a community advisory board that just neuters the departments, and the cops don't want to go out and do anything because they're afraid of getting disciplined for even talking to someone the wrong way. And I don't think that's true. I think you can have a department that is like ready to go, like do their jobs and excited every day, and also have the understanding in the back of their mind that, well, if we do the wrong thing, the hammer is going to get dropped down on us a little bit. You can have both, and I've never had an issue with that. Like as a deputy, I've always understood that, like as long as I'm not doing the right stuff, if I'm working for an administration that I feel like backs me, then I'm good to go. And so that's kind of my short answer to that. But ultimately, most of the issues in our department come back to recruiting and retention.
Mm.
The biggest issue that I personally see with our sheriff's office is that we're really good at the sexy stuff. The SWAT team, hey man, big budget for the SWAT team. And I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm not saying they don't need it, because there's a time and place for the SWAT team. And they do a great job. They've saved me a couple times. But K9, it's donation based. It's our most valuable resource at the entire sheriff's office. It's not even funded. The only reason we have a K9 team is because people out in the community give us money, additional money on top of taxpayer dollars. So, we have a three team K9 division, and they're funded on donations only. So you kind of see the discrepancy there, right? Like the K9 program we use every single night. I can't tell you the last time we did not use our K9 program at work. Whether we were doing like a demo for kids at a school, whether it was tracking a felony subject who fled from a car, we use them every single night, and they're not even funded. And so when I look at the sheriff's office, my goal is to really divert the resources to what people care about. And from what I can tell, and also just from working the job, people care about response time. Um, there's always been a lot of contention about, like, can deputies have beards? Can they have load-bearing vests that are external? All the stuff. I'm like, based on my experience with the community, they don't care if we show up in a pink leopard suit. If we show up in 10 minutes and handle their problem, they do not care. They don't care if we have tattoos. They don't care if we have beards. They don't care if our bulletproof vests are internal or external. Like there's a small portion of society that cares about that stuff, and you know, you can't please everyone. But so my goal is to basically kind of redirect the resources to what people care about. They care about homelessness, they care about response time, they care about open drug use, they care about domestic violence. Like these are all things that we don't have specialties for. We don't have like a dedicated team of deputies who deal with any of this stuff. It all falls back on General Patrol. And General Patrol currently has 36 out of 59 working deputies. So you can imagine all these things that don't have specialty teams, dedicated people working for them, just aren't getting addressed. You know, our domestic violence response, we're trying. I'm not saying we're not trying. We go out there every night and do our best, but we're undertrained in domestic violence. We are understaffed when it comes to responding to it. And these are labor-intensive calls. You know, your average DV where you go to make an arrest because, you know, wife hit husband, that's an hour-long call typically to get statements, to take photos, if you got to follow up at the hospital. And that's one of our 7 deputies for 150,000 people that's pulled off the road, 2 of them. And so the fact that we don't have these teams to deal with this stuff on an ongoing basis, you know, again, I see an opportunity to really address the things that people genuinely care about in our community and want to see better.
And it's really tough for me as a citizen, you know, as a vet, to have a full understanding of how dangerous and violent DV cases can get. I've been involved in a situation. I've been involved in multiple situations where there's been DVs going on, and stepping up as a civilian doesn't always, you're not always going to just stopping the violent act does not always actually help. A lot of times they need resources. They need someone to remove that person because they still love them, but hey, this person just went hands-on with you and violated your physical body. They injured you in front of your kids. And what type of message are we sending to the community when we don't have a proper way of dealing with these situations? Anybody can go on YouTube and look up the police activity channel or active self-protection and watch these officers stepping into DVs. It's not always a smooth situation. And if we don't have a lot of officers staffed, that officer could be in harm's way as well, because DVs can escalate or de-escalate. They don't stay normal.
Right. I mean, especially at the sheriff's office, right? So again, I cannot emphasize our staffing crisis. It is so bad. We are the least ranked sheriff's office in the state per capita. And Washington State is the least staffed state per capita in the country. So we're dead last of dead last. So I cannot stress how poor our staffing is. I think we're at like 0.60 deputies per 1,000 citizens. So, you know, when you talk about, again, we have it's a county of 300,000. So it's pretty big. About 150,000, 160,000 approximately unincorporated citizens that we're responsible for. At any given point in time, we have 7 deputies working. And so I regularly go to domestic violence calls by myself, which is not the industry standard. Industry standard is 2 units all the time. But, you know, again, like we kind of talk about, and we'll probably talk about later, like I didn't get into this job to like stand outside someone's door while they get their face beat in. Right.
100%.
So, you know, I tell everyone that, you know, everyone has to make their own decisions when it comes to stuff like that. Right. You know, are you the type of person who's going to go in and kind of sacrifice yourself a little bit for the greater good? Or, you know, you can wait too. But you may also have to live with the outcome of that if it doesn't end up favorable.
And we also don't want the people responding to these calls to have their lives ended as well, because you have a mother, you have a family that loves you, and you have a community that has a lot of support behind you as well. I've seen it, and I've seen the conversation. There's a guy I talked to at our event that we met up at, and it was overwhelming hearing how much he admires your how you want to impact the society. That's like your area. You were always been in that area, and it's home to you. It's not like, oh, a lot of people say don't shop where you sleep or don't cop where you sleep. It's not like that. This is your home, and you really do care about these people, and it shows.
I know. Again, that's why I didn't want to leave, but like, dude, you can only take so much of a beating as an employee. And it's not just me, right? I'm not sitting here complaining for just me. It's all of us. All of us working there are just retired.
And that's what's going on with the military right now. I don't know a single person who has a good attitude in the Navy right now. And I'm actually being asked to come and talk to them, to a guy who has a ship over in Spain. He called me. He's like, dude, I need help. I don't know what can you please try to talk to these people? Because morale is low and people are leaving.
Yeah.
if without staffing, the Navy can't do its job, the sheriff can't do their job, the sheriff's
Right.
deputies can't do their job. And normally when bad things happen, the leader steps down and says, hey, all right, we need to have a come to Jesus meeting. I'm going to be running patrol anymore. My little office job is over. I'm being
Right.
active in my community now. Is that happening now?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're seeing an explosion of activity from him, the incumbent sheriff. Um, and I'm all good with it to an extent. It's just, for me, it's always going to be, why did I have to? Because let's say I lose, right? Let's say that he just beats the crap out of me in the primary election. Why did I have to throw my career away to get this?
Mm.
You know, like, this is how you guys always should have acted. You guys should have always been out in the community doing this kind of stuff. Because I'm tired of the political stuff where if the incumbent has a 4-year term, well, every 4 years he becomes real active. Your job, you get paid really well as an elected sheriff. You get a lot of authority, you get a lot of clout. Just do your job for 4 straight years. It's not that much to ask for. You got a lot of deputies, you got a lot of employees that are working hard for you every day. And through the pandemic and stuff, we just never saw him. Never. I think I went 13 months without hearing or seeing directly from the incumbent sheriff. And that's supposed to be my leader, right?
And he only has 30. He only has 39 bodies actively right now, correct?
We're even less than that now.
Or even less than that now. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So
yeah. But that's kind of the caveat to the whole, well, you're too young. And I'm like, well, that's okay. Yeah, I am young, don't get me wrong. I think I'll be the youngest sheriff ever elected in Washington State. But at the same time, there are some benefits that come with that. Most importantly, in my opinion, is that I'm not going to stop working. I'm going to continue to respond to 911 calls and be what they consider to be like an active working sheriff, a duty sheriff. Because without that, you can see how quickly the incumbent has lost touch with the realities of police work. Some of the things that are coming out of his mouth, it's hard for me to fathom. It's almost like he's not a cop at all. And that's difficult to see from the law enforcement perspective, because he's the one who's advocating for public safety. He's the one who's out in the community, supposed to be advocating for us. And when you hear things come out of his mouth that sounds like he's not even a law enforcement official, that's difficult because, kind of like the military, right? If you haven't done it, you don't get the respect for it. And so, that's why you see historically sheriffs who get elected, because you don't have to be a cop to be the sheriff. Anyone can run for that position. They don't last very long. Right? They don't have the respect of the people. They don't have the understanding of what they've gone through. And so, that'd be like I'm not a military veteran. That'd be like if I came in and I was your major, right? And I'm like,
yeah,
all right,
it'd be kind of weird.
It'd be kind of weird, right? Like, you guys would have a hard time trusting me. You'd have a hard time. Now, it's not to say that I couldn't eventually do it, but it's an uphill battle, and you got to work 5 times as hard to get there if that's how you're going to do it. And so for the sheriff to come out there and say stuff,
you can't take the back seat.
You can't take a back seat
and say, "Oh, I drove here."
Right, I drove here. Yeah.
In a limo, in the back of a limo. So
yeah,
that's sad. It honestly is sad because this is not something that anybody wants to hear, and the truth always comes out eventually, and that's what I love about the truth. It's so powerful. And it really is difficult when you see people who are elected leaders, taxpayer funded leaders, completely just being absent. And it does reflect. If I can walk up as a civilian and look in the eyes of a sheriff deputy, they either are going to have a very vigilant look usually, or oh shit, I had a horrible day look. And those are the tough ones to see, because I always try to interact with law enforcement officers when I see them. So as a community member, it's tough to see that. And I'm not even in Thurston County right now, so which is tough. I would just say, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll come and play. But the future, I made the trek once. I might make the trek again. Let's see.
Yeah,
what happens
absolutely.
in the future, man. What can we do to strengthen that community relation with the sheriff's office, or as far as all law enforcement communities can do?
Well, I think the days of because historically what I see is that we say that we want community policing, and for the record, right, because I get labeled as the woke sheriff, because I'm just not as hardcore Republican as my opponent. But at the end of the day, I still want to take people to jail. I still want to do good law enforcement. It's just that I guess that's kind of what you get for like saying that you want to hold bad cops accountable. But you know, I think that historically we say we want community-based policing, but the reality is that we just say that, and then what we get for community-based policing is like basically police leaders, and this is just how I'm kind of envisioning it. They delegate it to someone else within the department because the chief doesn't want to go out and the sheriff doesn't want to go out and do that stuff. So they delegate it to some lieutenant, right? And so the lieutenant is tasked with like community engagement, quote unquote. What is it? What does that mean? What is that? Right? Like, do you just hop in your patrol car and start driving by businesses and being like, hey, like, you guys want to throw an event here and we'll come drink coffee, right? Because historically, that's kind of what we see. So, most recently, like they did like the coffee with a cop at Starbucks. So like that has been done over and over and over again. And it's cool. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It just kind of seems like that's it. Like that is our big solution to like community police, like community-based interaction is like, well, we'll be at Starbucks. Why don't you come to us if you want to hang out with us today? And like I said, I have no issue with doing the coffee with a cop thing. I think it's great. I just think that there's more to it than that. So, one of the plans I have is doing a community advisory board. And the goal with that is to have a diversified. So basically in Thurston County, we have 5 patrol districts. What I want is 2 people from each of those districts to serve on this board. And it would just be kind of like a 2-year rotation kind of thing. So you'd rotate through it, but each person would go through and they would serve on a 2-year rotation. And I'm looking for diversity in that. I'm looking for diversity in race, sex, socioeconomic status, because we can basically get a wide group of civilians and have a structured format for them to come address issues within their own local, hyper local communities, right? Because these are districts within Thurston County, not even Thurston County, right? Because Rochester has different problems than Tanglewild up on Martin Way. Tanglewild's dense, it's urban. Rochester is country. So our response to those 2 areas are going to be very different. The way that we deal with the problems in those areas are going to be different. It's just reality. Like even when you look at, cops are funny, right? Like for me, I'm a North County guy. Like I like the dense. I almost want to be like a city cop. I like being in the dense area with tons of people, high call volume. And then you've got Rochester, which also has a high call volume, but it's super spread out. It's country. And so how do we connect with people from both areas? Because they're different and they're politically different. And everything about those 2 districts is different. And so something like a community advisory board, for me, it adds structure. So we have the ability to add a structured time where every quarter, for instance, we're all meeting. We're all sitting down. No matter how busy we are, we're all going to sit down in a room and we're going to go around the table and say, what are your issues? And some of you might be business owners. Some of you might work at nonprofits. These are our doors for regular structured involvement to get the sheriff's office involved in these things, right? Like, hey, this person who is up in the Adam precinct, who serves on this board, she's actually part of a nonprofit for breast cancer. So we're going to get like 40 deputies to go out there and walk a parade with her. These are the kind of things that I think the old-fashioned days of just saying, well, we're involved in the community. I don't think they work anymore. We're too big. We're too diverse. We actually need a structure to it. There needs to be a plan moving forward. It seems like we're just kind of winging it. And we're just kind of like, oh no, we're involved in the community because every once in a while someone reaches out and we go to their event. But it's going to take more than that, I think.
Absolutely, definitely will. There's nothing more important than being able to trust the people who you call to show up, and as that goes the other way as well. The sheriff's deputies and cops should not have to show up and be met with rage and frustration and hatred when they're showing up to help, right? So yeah. It's really good to have community involvement. Something that I admire the Linwood Police Department does is they just did the community public safety fair on 44th. Before that, they had cops and kids where they brought out every single piece of their gear and just showed off what they do and explained their jobs. They high-fived, they gave out stickers, pictures with kids, just talk about what their job is. And that really does break down those walls. We can't expect to win the hearts and minds of people in our community, whether we're in the military. Like, I'm going to get called a baby killer. It's going to happen eventually, right? Yeah. It's happened a bunch before. I'm going to get called all sorts of names. Cops going to get officers get called all sorts of names as well.
Yeah.
And it's sad that that's the reality of the situation. But in order to really bring the community together, there has to be constant things. It has to be not just stickers. And we can't also run an insurgency. We're not rolling around in a Humvee, not getting out.
Right.
They get out in war zones. They get out of their car and talk. It can be done in the streets when you're traveling your area of operation.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the type of engagement that you need, right? But I just, it's one of those things where, people are timid, right? Especially, like look at the political swing right now. I mean, 2 years ago, George Floyd was murdered, and you just go into this dip, right? Where like we can't do anything right. And right now it's kind of back on the other side now. I do feel like the pendulum has just swung the other way naturally. There hasn't been like a high profile killing in the news, and so right now everything's kind of calm actually. But tomorrow it's just going to take that one bad incident that could occur anywhere in the country,
especially since it's an election year.
Yeah, it's an election
and politics
year.
are pop culture now,
and heads will roll somewhere, and so that's something that we have to keep in mind too, right? Is that at the end of the day, all we can control is what we do here in Thurston County. That's my goal, is that Thurston County has to worry about what Thurston County does, because if I wanted to go change the world, I would go run for president. That's what I'd be doing. But my goal is to change Thurston County and bring us back to some common sense police work. And so, through that, I think like a community advisory board would be super helpful to bridge that gap there, and just have a it's almost, and it's almost something that like couples do, right? Mm-hmm. Two couples living really busy lives. They have a time where like, okay, like no matter how busy we are, on Fridays are ours or whatever it is, right? Like that's kind of the same idea, is like, no matter how busy we are, we have to still carve time out. Because I'm going to be busy if I get elected. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, you're not going to see me out handling general patrol at first. You're not going to see me out doing probably a whole lot of community events, because we got to get our stuff in order. We got to figure out, like, we got to settle in for those first few months. But again, you get to a point where you're like, all right, like no matter how busy we are, like we have to meet up.
And establish common ground between you and the community.
Yep,
it's exactly. Super essential. Well, that's crazy that such a simple thing, more than meeting up once every 6 months, can make a huge difference. Right. I love seeing community relations improve, because it is essential for a functioning society. We have to make sure that we are covering our bases. It can't, like I said before, it can't be an insurgency. We sit here and in the military, we put a American flag on our chest. If they don't think well of us back home, this whole idea, this freedom thing, it decreases like significantly. People, it happened in Vietnam War. You guys are going over there to demonize whatever the hell. But a lot of them were just following orders, and there was also like a draft or something like that. But regardless, when we are acting as community servants, whether we're firefighters, law enforcement officers, EMTs, for any first responder or an elected official, we have to make sure we're representing our constituents and supporting them with the taxpayer funded things that we're doing. And I think you got a good idea with this this board. This is a really good idea to break ground.
Yeah, and it's
man. So the community relation board is something I'm definitely on board with. I think every area should have that, and it shouldn't be a "what did you do wrong this week" board necessarily.
No,
it should just be finding common ground.
And it's not, this isn't an oversight board. There's a difference. An advisory board is where you get to use the community to bounce ideas off of before they occur. The oversight board is the one that puts a choke collar on the elected sheriff or the police chief or whoever it is, and they get involved with like Department of Justice. That's usually when you have ongoing widespread corruption through a department and the feds have taken over. So totally different thing, not to be confused. The community advisory board, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to make it work better.
Yeah, and nothing wrong with that at all. So I do have this exercise that I do, and I spend a lot of time, obviously I'm injured right now with my shoulder, but I'm going around and asking everyone in my community the same usual question, whether it's a kid. Obviously, if it's a child, I word it differently, but overall the idea is, hey, what is your your police, your mayor, your city elected officials, your sheriff's office, have they made any announcements, or are your teachers telling you that they've done anything differently to keep the kids in these schools safe? This active shooter thing is really scary, and I say it just like that, like a little
Mhm.
innocent bug that has no idea how bad this is, when it's obviously affected my family pretty significantly when the Marysville Pilchuck High School shooting took
Right.
place. So, what do you think the two answers that I get usually are?
Nothing.
That's definitely one of them, and the other ones I have no idea,
I
because
have no idea.
there's usually nothing. Like, normally this is stuff they announce. Like,
Yeah. The
for
reason you
instance,
don't know is because they didn't do anything.
yes, 100%.
You
I
assume
know
they
Polk
did.
County Sheriff is down in Florida. He is super active in
Yeah.
preventing active shooters with the Guardian program, and I think it's a good program.
Yep.
What do you envision being a way we can start combating this huge problem?
Well, I think it's important to give the backstory to this because this is not my idea. It's not my credit. So earlier this year, as we continued to lose more and more patrol deputies, a decision was made that so we have 3 school resource officers within our county, one for the Rochester schools, one for the Rainier schools, and one for North Thurston schools, which covered a middle school and I think like 5 to 7 roughly elementary schools. The decision was made that we were not going to extend our contract with North Thurston Public Schools because Lacey was annexing the middle school, which, to be fair, was the bulk of the work. Um, but it then left all of those elementary schools without even a part-time SRO. Because the reality is, most of our SROs, I think, spend most of the time at the high schools, because that's where more of the, like your third grade teacher can probably handle the little spar between the two kids in the classroom. It's going to be, your high school English teacher who's trying to hold 2 left tackles back from each other in the classroom, where the SROs probably spend more of their time. Um, and so, again, this was 2 weeks before the Uvalde shooting. So I mean, the timing could not have been worse. Everything about it was terrible. And another thing, right? Like, had the sheriff actually taken the time to come to our police guild and asked us, "Hey, staffing's really bad right now. We're working on it. Would you guys like to have us pull one of the school resource officers out?" I can tell you with almost 100% certainty the guild would have said absolutely not. Leave the school resource officer in there. We'll work through this, right? Didn't come and ask us. Didn't have the time to care, I guess. And so they pulled the contract. And so this was going to be our school resource officers last year there. And there was some outrage and whatnot. And so I criticized the sheriff for it on my campaign page. I'm like, we just had a school shooting down in Texas. This is terrible timing. This is not what people want to see, right? The last thing people want to see is a horrific school shooting in another state, and that their own school resource officer was just yanked from the school because the sheriff, and it just looks bad, right? The sheriff can't staff a department, so we've got to pull from all these other important resources.
If optics is their number one goal, that is not something they
That's not
want to
it.
do.
That's not it, right? That's politics 101, right? Like, you got to be able to read the room. And so I got criticized by a lot of his supporters, for politicizing the death of children. And I'm like, well, I mean, you can call it
I
whatever
think
you
that's the
want.
opposite. I think you're advocating for protecting them. It's the
Correct.
polar opposite.
And there was a lot of hypocrisy there. Like, one of the people went on there and was like, "You're just politicizing this." But then 2 hours before I said anything, she went on there and made a big public statement about gun control and how we have to take all the guns, how long are we going to wait to keep letting people have. And so I'm like, you got involved in this, and listen, I disagree with that, but you got involved with this before I even did, right? We're all upset. We all want to see things change. And all I'm asking is that our school resource officer be put back. And so I will say this, and this is why I listen to everyone, even the people that just crap on me all the time. Because this certain individual really doesn't like me. She's actually a county employee. She really doesn't like me. And I'm like, okay, but I still try to engage when I can. And she actually brought up a super good point. She said, even if we got that school resource officer back, it still leaves 7 elementary schools exposed. And I'm like, wow, yeah, you're right. I didn't really think about that, right? Because, the schools are a part of my campaign, but it's not the whole thing. So I'm focused on other stuff too. And I'm like, damn. And it must not have been 2 days later that I saw Anthony Triplett sitting in front of Lake Forest Elementary with a sign that said Veteran Overwatch, protecting our children. That's the school that just lost its school resource officer. And
Yeah,
I'm
you
like,
stepped up.
it just clicked for me though. I was like, that could be something. So I met up with Anthony and I talked with him, and I got good vibes from him. I was like, this seems like a dude who just wants to keep, because his daughter goes to that school, right? So I think he took a personal stance of like, not my school, right? Like, might be the school down the road, unfortunately, but like my kid's gonna be okay when she gets off the bus today. And so I have to think ahead of these things though, man, because as a young challenger, everything I say is impossible. That's how this stuff works, right? When you're 29 years old and you're challenging your boss who has 30 years of police experience, I know nothing. Nothing I want to do is going to work. It's all a failure. Everything I say is a lie. How am I going to pay for it? And so I started thinking ahead. I'm like, well, how are they going to
That's not his
this?
job anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I had to start thinking ahead for this program, right? I'm like, okay, now I'm obviously going to need cooperation from the schools. So I'm going to have to sell this to the schools, to the school boards, to the families. And I'm also going to have to figure out a way, like, if we wanted to throw a veteran in all of our schools, like, that's a lot of money. And I'm like, well, I'm talking with Anthony. He's like, I don't think you have to pay. He's like, as long as you cover uniforms and basic training and qualifications, he's like, I know about 20 vets right now that would step up and do it. So I'm like, okay, well, there it is then, right? It's a volunteer veteran Overwatch program where as long as you can pass all the criteria, then we will let you, and it's going to take a lot. This program's going to take a lot of work to institute. But basically, you'll get a commission from the sheriff to be able to provide school security. And I'm like, it just fills so many gaps. It fills gaps in the veteran world. It fills gaps at the schools. It fills gaps at the sheriff's office. And we just kind of ran with it, and it caught fire pretty quick. Lot of support for the program. And so that's what I think is funny, right? Is that, there are things in this world that are impossible. It's impossible to sell bazookas at gas stations because that's not a popular thing. When you get something like this that so many people want to see happen, I have a hard time believing that it's impossible and that it's dangerous and that no one's going to want to get on board.
And even more so, it's not impossible because he did it single-handedly already.
Right. And that's the other thing too, right? Like, one of the things I get, well, I don't want an armed veteran in my school with my kids. And I'm like, okay, they're just going to sit up the front then. And if the sheriff's office takes a government rule on this, we can vet that person. So we can take that person and put them through a background and put them through a psychological test and go, they're fit. Like, there's no reason they can't do this. Otherwise,
and who wouldn't want someone being vetted and being checked?
Right.
It's good. Exactly. It's good to know you can trust somebody with a gun around a school. Right.
Right. And so the alternative people don't understand is that I don't think this is going away. Like if I lose the election and step back, a veteran Overwatch isn't done. It's probably going to get bigger and expand as it goes. The question is whether or not we want the government to get involved in it. And now, granted, I say that with a grain of salt because the government has a good history of ruining things like this. But I think sheriffs are kind of in a unique position where they get a lot of unilateral authority to do stuff like this and sway and influence because they're accountable once every 4 years to the people. And so I just got to a point where I'm like, well, we kind of built this program so it could not really be. The only thing that you can do to attack this program is say that you either don't like veterans or that you really hate guns so much that you would rather risk your kids at school every day. And, to the people for that, I don't think we're going to come to an agreement anyways.
And the one thing I've always ran into is no matter what people's stances when I ask these questions is they're just scared. Ultimately, they're scared for their kids. Who do we ask? Who do we ask for help? Who do we ask for help?
Sure.
And a couple years ago, we couldn't trust the police. Everybody knows we can't trust politicians who've been in office for a long time. Everybody knows it because they just say whatever to get reelected. A lot of people don't want to do active things, but people that are actually challenging I wouldn't say the system. I would say challenging the current situation and the status quo, saying, hey, whatever we're doing now isn't working because no matter what anybody says right now, whatever we're doing right now is not working. We've seen the politicians stand on the graves of dead children and say, this is why we got to stop guns. Like, people get their hands on guns. I know you've
Shoot.
dealt with this occupationally quite a bit with,
So many guns
illegal guns that are transported in this. There's TV shows about it called Sons of Anarchy. Like,
right.
literal TV show. We
Yeah.
have culture, pop culture on TV about moving guns into America. You think it doesn't happen?
Right.
Keeping guns in the hands of good people and taking them out of bad people's hands is a positive thing. Yes. Not being able to be properly staffed and respond to these DV cases when sometimes there is a firearm involved. And sadly, I've watched the body cam footage of the times where it is, and it is painful to see the damage and destruction on these children's faces as they're devastated. We got to get the guns out of the hands of bad guys, not the good guys.
On DV stuff, I can't think of the last officer involved or the last homicide that we had in this county that wasn't domestic violence. They almost all are domestic violence homicides. So yeah, and on the topic of the Second Amendment, because I get that all right, you're the sheriff, and yeah, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. It just I see it as a constitutional right. I support constitutional carry. I don't think you should have a permit. If you need a permit, it's not a right. That's my personal perspective on, and I feel the same way about protesting.
Yes, 100%.
If you need a permit to protest, it's not a right. It's a privilege. It's a privilege offered to you by a government entity, and that's driving. Right? Driving is a privilege. There's no constitutional right to driving, but that'd be like handing out a permit to walk. You need a permit to walk on this sidewalk over here. You got to go to government, big daddy government, to get it, right? So, as it pertains to the Second Amendment, I strongly support it. I firmly believe it's a huge part of our to me, it's actually what kind of holds together the Constitution. When you talk about tyranny and the government and really how our entire country was birthed, it was birthed on rebellion and guns. I mean, that's our country, and so historically we've stuck with that. That's why there's so many guns in this country. Yes. Is because that's like we're just not Great Britain. We're not New Zealand. That's not how our countries were founded. That's not how our country was founded. And so on that topic, that's why I just, you'd spend probably, I don't know what, even if you had a concerted effort and even a modicum of cooperation, you'd probably spend the next 50 years trying to confiscate all the guns in this country. And that's probably if you got like a large scale military sweep. That's how long it would probably take. Between the guerrilla warfare and the civil war that would occur.
I don't think it would go over well at all.
It just wouldn't, right? The country would fail, and so I don't think that that's really the answer moving forward. And to be completely fair, when it comes to veteran overwatch and stuff like this is me tired of government elected officials debating for decades, because school shooters are not new, right? Columbine changed everything for us, but what this is it's me tired and not willing to just sit back and wait anymore. I'm tired of the headlines. I'm tired, and my biggest concern is that it's gonna hit Thurston County. And why not Thurston County? It's the capital county. We've got a diverse population here. We could very well be the next school shooting. And so my whole thing is just it won't be on my watch. That's my only goal, is that the school shooting won't be on my watch. If someone does make the attempt, they'll fail, and all the kids and the teachers will be safe. And so when you look at this kind of stuff, where I will also just briefly touch on is that I am fully aware this does nothing to solve the problems of active shooters in the first place. I've talked with a number of elected officials, and I fully agree with them that the net to catch kids needs to be tighter, because that's where this starts, right? This starts with kids who don't feel nurtured. They have terrible home lives. Their home lives are not stable. They get bullied at school because of it. And I was one of them, right? Like, that was me. I was the kid who wore the same clothes every day to school because other kids don't realize I live in a van. Like, I don't take a shower before school sometimes. So, like, it's one of those things where we have to make sure that these social programs and stuff are important. And that's where I think I get called the woke sheriff, right? But it's just the fact that I truly recognize that veteran overwatch does nothing to prevent the idea of active shooters in the first place. The only thing I will say is that that's not the primary function of the sheriff, right? I delegate that to the state representatives, to Congress, to school board officials. That's teachers. That's their world, right? Making sure that kids who are abused get help and things like that. My only thing that I'm saying, like the veteran Overwatch thing, school security can and should be a sheriff's office issue. And I'm more than willing to work with all and do everything we can to prevent that kid from ever even getting to the point where he wants to shoot up his school. However, I just refuse to accept the idea that we can just prevent all school shootings forever by instituting good social programs. Not realistic. And I kind of compare it to home security, right? So your house probably has a deadbolt on it, right?
Yep.
Is that going to prevent it from being broken into?
No, and neither will the security cameras or the sign that says ring doorbell or the nice lady that the automated voice that says, "Hi, you're currently being recorded," because there still has been and there still will be times in the future in the middle of the night where I have to respond to people trying to access my vehicles. I had my ring doorbell. I didn't have it set up at the time, but I had I was still charging my ring doorbell. Somebody tried to kick down and burst through my front door and harm my wife. And the police response was over 30 minutes. And that was one of the times where, we often talked about, this was the year 2020. So we talk about optics, right? Being a big topic of police. It took them 30 minutes. I live less than a mile from the police station, and there's always cars parked there. Optic was such a major issue there that they didn't, I don't know what was stopping the response. It was an attempted forced entry in my home. And I called the operator 9 different times, hoping to get different operators. And I demanded to speak to the sergeant on duty. Because one is my friend, and 2, I know him from previous experiences. And I finally got up through to him and said, "Hey man, I'm going to be honest with you. If you're not at my house in 60 seconds, I'm driving from Mukilteo, and I'm going to deal with this the way I feel I need to deal with it, because there's someone's trying to possibly kill my wife." So thankfully, their optics wasn't that important anymore. But and we got to avoid the situation. But response, manning, protecting schools and kids, like everything about your message is super important. And there's not one person that can say that protecting children is not more important than optics.
Right.
It is 100% the top priority. And I know for DV situations, like you talked about the Second Amendment earlier, for DV situations, pulling guns that hold like more rounds, more than 10 rounds. It's just a simple topic that happened. I've experienced my own friends having to be in violent situations, and thank God they had more than 10 rounds because there was multiple attackers. Now, does my friend have to live with the fact that they just ended lives? Yes. But thankfully my friend was not abducted.
Yeah. They're still alive.
Simplest things like that. The Second Amendment is here to not just help the bad guys, it's to help the good guys too.
Yeah. Well, and my whole thing is just, like the 30 round magazine ban, it's not going to save even one life, right? It feels good, right? To people who don't like guns, it feels good. I do not disagree with that. It probably feels really good that legislation, was passed. But I firmly, first of all, it's not even a law enforcement issue, right? We don't respond to 30 round magazines, right? Because the law really just made it so Cabela's couldn't sell it. That's all it did. Then people still own them. I still own, 5 dozen of them. But the reality is that that's not going to keep us safe. What would keep us safe is actually keeping violent criminals locked away.
100%. And that's really important too. Criminals don't follow laws.
Repeat offenders, right? Yes. Like 90% of my job is dealing with the same person over and over again. I'm like, oh, we took a robbery down in the valley. Like, I already know who it is. We arrested him last month for a robbery. And I know it's him because I checked the jail roster today and he got PR'd.
Yep.
He got PR'd. It's him again. Yep. Sure enough, we look at the footage, like, oh, yep, he just out robbing the same gas station again, right? Like, those are the kind of things where eventually we get to a point where we contact these violent criminals who are in possession of firearms, right? Like, these are the type of firearm reform laws that we need, are taking it serious when we actually do catch them. Is how many times we're going to get into these high escalation, high stress, incidents with these people before we end up having to shoot one, right? Because they pull the gun, they go to toss the gun, and we shoot them before they can drop the gun, right? Whatever it is, these terrible situations that could be prevented if they were just held accountable the first time.
And loss of life is never good.
No, and I look at a lot of our people, and I go, well, you know what? that person would still be alive if they actually served a fair prison sentence for their first armed robbery.
Mm-hmm.
They'd still be in DOC.
Amen.
They'd still be in prison. But, you guys gave them a slap on the wrist, 19 months for an armed robbery, carjacking, and now here we are, right? Now they're dead because they never even, and it's a disservice to them. They never even had an opportunity to reform.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right? They were in prison
slap on the wrist, and
short...
they're invited to come and do it again.
Yep, they were in prison for such a short amount of time that they didn't even have an opportunity to change their behavior.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. I definitely do agree. I've dealt with that in my family. Unfortunately, we have people who have been around, and I have I don't have the best family in the world on my dad's side, but I had things happen. We all know criminals. We all know people who
Same quote.
who do things, man. So we talked about the things you're doing. Obviously, there's a lot of pushback. There has to be pushback, and not just from the person you're running against. I know that in Florida at the Parkland shooting that killed 17 kids, it was one of the worst recorded in this country. There's the last county to conform with the governor and the lead sheriff in the instance was Polk County Sheriff. His plan was to implement the Guardian program, which is not what you're talking about, but it is an idea, and it does put guns in the hands of good guys in a school. And he high fives the kids on the way in. Single point entry is a big issue. Locking doors. And there's different people that talk about different ways to prevent these shootings. I love the idea of Anthony and his program and what you're doing as well to support it from a hands-off and hands-on approach at the same time, because you don't want it to be taken over and turn into something that's not positive anymore, which is awesome, dude. Broward County was the last of the counties in Florida to conform to the idea of putting the Guardian program into place.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want guns in the schools. The county that it happened in.
Right.
And they had to get pressure from the sheriff's office to conform to protect kids ultimately. And thankfully there hasn't been a similar situation because of the Guardian program. And if anybody doesn't know what it is, I really do encourage them to look it up. Do you have pushback as far as Anthony's idea?
Yeah, but it's all political.
Okay.
Because let's play the political stereotype game, right? Democrats don't like guns. Republicans do like guns. Democrats don't want any guns ever in schools ever. They never want to see them. Okay, fine. Republicans think that the 4-year-old should have a gun, right? Let's just throw out like the extreme political,
the extremes,
right? Like everyone needs a gun. Like my 8-year-old should be packing on the way to school, right? So somewhere in the middle there is where I think most people lie, right? They lie and kind of like that's reasonable and not really a big fan. So most people with enough evidence, I think, are willing to bend their views slightly either direction. It's happened to me over my lifetime, right? Like I'm sure most people I don't feel like are raised in a household politically and never change their views. I feel like most people change their views slightly. Like mine was marijuana. Marijuana was a big one for me. Like I grew up in that's for the devil. You don't even look at it. If you see it, call 911. Yes, I've never smoked in my entire life. But over time, right, I started, especially when I got into law enforcement, I was like, hey man, I'm not saying you guys lied. I'm just saying that like alcohol's 10 times worse. Mm-hmm. I'd rather deal with a person who's high on marijuana and just won't get up to get into my patrol car than the person who's drunk and is just ready to swing. They're ready to go 10 rounds out in the backyard.
Oh yeah.
And so, over time, our political ideas, they kind of bend a little bit and they kind of go with society because society typically moves forward, not backwards. And what's mostly interesting about this, and I shouldn't actually say interesting, what's actually disappointing about this is seeing members of this department who I know are like staunch Republicans would love this idea if it was theirs. That's, I think, the most disappointing part. I'm watching people who I know want school security try to sabotage this program so that I'm not elected. Because I tied myself to this program. For better or worse, I tied myself to Anthony in the Veteran Overwatch program. So if, if Anthony ends up being some crazy extremist who wants to go in there and, indoctrinate the kids while he's doing security, well, I tied myself to that. So my ship would probably sink with him. On the other hand, if this program explodes in the way that it's already kind of has, well, then I've also tied myself to a rocket ship that's going to space, right? So it's one of those things where that's kind of the most disappointing thing I'm seeing with the veteran Overwatch thing is people that I know that I've had long conversations with at night, and I know what kind of political ideologies they have. I know that they're not afraid of guns. Pretend like they're afraid of guns in schools. I've got people that I know own like a dozen guns, and they're literally out there like, this is a dangerous program. We don't want guns in schools, and I'm just like, what can you what
Is
can
that
you
why
even
you
say,
pulled the
right?
SROs?
Right. That's what I'm saying. I can't even. It's hard for me to fathom, right? I just can't imagine. Like, there are things that John and I definitely don't agree with. However, there are things that John and I 100% do agree with. John being my opponent. Um, I'm not going to change my political ideology just to disagree with the man. There are things that him and I both agree on, right? Like, we both agree, like, he did a great job with like sex offender registration stuff. The sheriff's office here was kind of the one that started it for the whole state. Granted, it started before him, but he's carried the torch. And I plan to as well, right? Like, sex offender registration is a big deal.
Oh yeah.
We want to know where they live. We want to know if they're next to our schools, if they're next to our playgrounds, all that kind of stuff. And so I can't imagine being like just changing my political ideology just to disagree with the man for political purposes. There are things that him and I both agree on that we're going to do very similar. And so that's what's mostly disappointing about like the veteran Overwatch thing, is just watching people that I know for a fact, if this were John's idea, they would be championing it. But because it looks good for me politically, because I tied myself to it. I tied my string to his leg, and it's exploded. And I'm supporting the program because it has the potential alone to get me elected. It's become a point of contention. It's dangerous. I mean, they got to the point where they're sharing articles that are like super derogatory towards veterans, describing
I don't
veterans.
personally like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Because I did
describing
my homework and
veterans
I
as,
looked it up and I was like, oh my goodness, wow.
yes, and
You must hate
it's also
me.
funny.
Shit.
So for the people that are listening, that's an article that was an op-ed that was written to the Olympian here, a local newspaper, and it was written by a fake person. So the saddest part about that is that someone over there wrote that, pretended it was this lady who, when we did our research, she lives up in Seattle and has never voted. So highly unlikely that this person went and wrote an article down in the Olympian for Thurston County. Someone who's never voted in their life cares about politics in the county 2 counties away. It's unlikely. And so, but they basically wrote this article that described veteran Overwatch as dangerous. They didn't read anything I put out because they completely ignored the fact that we're going to be putting them through backgrounds and psychological, and there is a vetting process. So they claim there was no vetting process. They claim that we were just going to throw lunatics, aka veterans, into schools around kids. And they ultimately went on to describe veterans as people who likely couldn't pass drug background or drug tests, background checks, or psychological tests, and that they're dangerous to be around children.
Well,
And
then why do we
high-ranking
have
county
them?
officials.
Why do we send the 18-year-old people who turn into vets to Iraq so you
Right.
don't have to go? Is
Yeah.
what
You're
if like if someone asked me that question, and saying that we have, okay, well, we don't want to put more guns in the schools, my immediate response and question would be, but you want the bad guns in schools just to keep going off? It's no secret. Anybody can go on the internet right now and watch the footage from Uvalde. That is the ultimate worst case scenario. You have
Yeah.
over 100 officers that responded. Over 100.
Right.
100. One child with a gun, deranged, going off the deep end. I don't know why I just said that. I don't go off the deep end like that, but he went off the deep end and went insane and lit up a school. And every gunshot, every bullet, a 5.56 that he had chambered at that moment, went into a child's body or
Right.
the ground near him. Regardless, it's bad. Every
Right.
single bullet that came out of his gun, the people that were standing there doing nothing were accountable for. And you know what? No, I wish I could say I would have done differently, but I can't sit here and judge because nobody knows what they're going to do in a situation.
You don't.
A lot of these people commenting and saying that the vets are dangerous people. I know vets who've run into gunfire and grabbed their buddy only to take bullets themselves and lose legs, lose limbs, lose function in a whole side of their body. They're not able to procreate anymore. Like their stuff doesn't work, and they saved their buddy's life. They're willing to run, put their hand in the fire so others don't get burnt. Kind of like you attaching your name to the idea of, I'm not going to stand outside a house when there's a DV going on. They stick their hand in the fire so nobody else gets burnt. Vets are willing to do that. There are people out there who are enraged. And this is not something that's just happening here. It's going on across the country. There are
Yes.
dads out there with some with their AR-15s slung across their body, which makes them obviously they're going to be the main focus when they walk into the school, and they get heat too.
Yeah.
But what's the alternative? Doing nothing.
Right.
All that needs that for bad stuff to happen, all we need is men and women in this country to do absolutely nothing. And we're seeing a lot of that, and throughout the communities, it's a big issue.
A lot of inaction, no shortage of inaction, and there's a lot that goes into it. But I got to the point at where the pushback on this thing, it's not coming from the community, it's coming in at like politically strategic times, and so the way that this is going to work for me is to do a pilot program. It's going to take a long time. This is not something that it's going to require numerous stakeholder meetings, meeting with board members, actually developing, the entire strategic plan for the program. But again, I get a lot of pushback. Well, how are you going to afford it? And, we thought ahead. We're like, it's free. I mean, it's virtually free. Like, yeah, we got to pay for the equipment. The radio is going to be expensive for each of these volunteers. It's $1,500 per radio, but they're not taking a salary yet. The idea is once we can show that the program is efficient and it's viable, then we can start working on wages and all that kind of stuff.
And they're also not doing SRO stuff. They're not responding to two kids fighting. They're there to bolster the security of the school. If somebody is an active shooter and they crash a brand new F-150 and they come out of the car with the truck with their brand new Daniel Defense rifle, right? And they have a bunch of magazines, I guess, and start unloading on a bunch of kids, they're not going to make it, hopefully, to that door. And they're going to be challenged. They're going to be very, very challenged by somebody who really cares about these kids enough to put their own life on the line, and not just for the country, for specifically these kids.
Absolutely. And so that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that it's a program that'll work. It'll take a long time. It's going to require a lot of meetings, a lot of stakeholders to get them involved. But I don't see why it can't. And again, there are things that are impossible. I agree. There are things that are so socially unaccepted that you're just not going to get there. But I think people are ready for something like this, just to try it out, right? Like maybe you don't like it. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe that's the case. But I hope that's going to be the case. But yeah, there is a misconception. And that's the thing about politics too, right? I can describe to people exactly how the program works 100 times. There's still going to be a good 20% of people that just take it out of context anyways, right? Like, I don't know how many times, Eddie, that I have stated they are not SROs. They will not be breaking up school fights. They are not here to spank your children at lunchtime. That they're just there to stand at the entrance and work on security measures around the school. They can either be invisible or right there at the front, right? It doesn't matter to me. But it doesn't matter how many times you say this stuff. People are like, well, we're just getting rid of the SRO program now. And I'm like, no.
It's already gone, baby.
Yeah. I mean, like, we're not here to get rid of SROs. They serve their own function. And part of that is school security. But a lot of the SRO function is not school security. A lot of it is building relationships between the county and the schools and all that kind of stuff. And so the school security part of it, right? Again, like that was one of those things where I'm glad that I take the time to listen to the critics, because sometimes the critics will give you some great stuff. Like, even though that person hates my guts, she provided me with the insight that ultimately helped me explode this whole thing into existence. Was like, yeah, we have an SRO, but he's a regional SRO. So even if we get him back, which we did, he can only spend, if he's got 7 schools he's responsible for, he's only one person. And those schools are spread out through a county. So how is he supposed to protect both schools at the same time? Well, he can't. And so, that's why that was a good lesson for me. It was a good lesson that ended up in a positive sense, is that, like, listen to the critics. Now, you don't have to take all of it serious, because a lot of it's not. She said a bunch of stuff about the Veteran Overwatch program that just wasn't true, no matter how many times we tried to explain it to her. But she did bring up something very valid that kind of sparked this whole thing. So it's important to listen to them. Don't just zone them out.
It definitely is. So I really do love your approach, and I think it's important. I think I can't tell you how many times I get disappointed because I've never heard one person, including the police, in the area, like, say, what they want to do and how they're actually preventing these issues. And it's super simple. We look at the police and the sheriffs. A lot of the things they do is called projection of power, and it has a psychological effect on people. There's a reason why criminals don't want to come out at night and do the shit they do. Obviously, we're seeing now that they are starting to come out at night, and they're enjoying coming out at night because they don't get in trouble. They're not held accountable anymore. When we do it in the military, we send a fleet of naval warships, and they post them on outside of an area, and they can run missions. They drop 500-pound and 1,000-pound bombs over Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever, or we just have them out there in the South China Sea. Projection of power is an important thing. Show of force, yes, precisely.
It's a show of force. Half the job for us.
Yes,
right. A lot of times, just us showing up, people calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Not everybody needs to go to jail. Some people just need to be good.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Do you think that putting these people in front of schools is ultimately going to change a lot of people's mind? Because what I've seen it previously, a lot of these people posting on social media, the copycats is a big issue. But for these active shooters, a lot of the stuff they're dealing with, they're just hurt, broken human beings, and they act out of cowardice. They harm people that have no way of defending themselves whatsoever. If we gave our schools and our children the tools to be defended without having the teachers armed or having the teachers defend themselves, which is happening in schools in Washington State, whether the government knows it or not, we have teachers and groups of parents who are refusing to allow this to happen again, because it's happened. We have a huge stain. A huge stain.
Yeah, I think it will. Here's what I will say is that in law enforcement, we have a lot of stuff which is considered a crime of opportunity, right? So, like, murdering your wife is not a crime of opportunity. The opportunity is always there. So it's not like one day your wife is unsuspecting and you're like, oh, I'm going to get her, right? That's not how that works. What we look at with crime of opportunity is, if you're someone who enjoys property crime and you drive down the street at 7:30 in the morning and someone left their car on to warm up, you might steal that car because the keys are in it. It's sitting right there. You see there's no video cameras anywhere. You're going to steal that car. It's a crime of opportunity, right? If that car were locked and not on, you probably never would have stolen it because you would have gone inside the house, burglarized the house, committed even more serious felony to get the keys and then come back out. So when we look at crime of opportunity, I believe that active shooters to some degree are a crime of opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're a disgruntled kid, right, like everything's gone the worst possibly for you. You've been bullied. They make fun of the way you look. They make fun of the way you smell. Your home life is probably not good because of those things. That's probably what's causing it. And you decide that you're going to shoot up a school. But two things have occurred in the meantime. One is that that there's an armed military veteran who's constantly scanning the school and is always basically interacting with the kids and stuff just on their way in casually, and he's armed. So that, first of all, he may shoot and kill you before you even accomplish even just one part of your mission there. The second is maybe that veteran has built a relationship with you.
That high five. That
maybe it was that high five, right? Maybe it was that one thing that prevented you from even going to this place in the first place. So I think when you look at both those things, I truly do believe that active shooters are a crime of opportunity, right? I mean, how many active shooters have you heard occur at a school with an SRO already in it? I don't know of any. I know that like the Broward County one got a lot of bad rep because you had an SRO who wasn't in the school but didn't go in. Mm-hmm. But it's when you look at this kind of stuff, it's like how many times have we seen school resource officer, a 13-year-old kid brings a gun to school and goes and attacks a security. Like, it's just not really what we hear in these stories, right? What we're hearing is that they walked in the front door, they walked through a door that was propped open and just started killing classmates. Like, that's wild. That's crazy. And so to me, it's a crime of opportunity, right? There's no one here who's going to resist me. There's no one here who's going to shoot back. I know they're not going to shoot back. It's a gun-free zone, right? These are just a bunch of kids. I know the teachers don't pack, and so this is my school is the perfect school to shoot at. Like that's a problem. That's a problem. And so, kind of like what I was talking with you earlier, right? Like Just because your front door has a deadbolt on it doesn't mean it won't be burglarized. However, when you start looking at diversified opportunities to protect your home, the likelihood that it's burglarized decreases significantly. So if you just have a deadbolt, well, criminals have figured out a long time ago they can just kick the door in, and now they're in. But then if you have an alarm system, now the alarm system goes off and someone gets notified about it. Well, that's a little bit more deterrence. And then, well, the homeowner also put a camera up so they can also see you real time. And now, even if you do get away, you may get caught later because you're on video. And you've got a 110-pound German Shepherd in the house now too, who might bite you. And also, we've got we've got a fence around our house. We have a gate at the end of the driveway. The likelihood that that person gets burglarized because of all the diversified options they have, extremely low. And so when you look at the diversified options we have to reduce the risk of school shooters, a lot of it includes social services, right? Expanding social services, making sure children feel nurtured and they're not excluded and outcasted. Part of it, though, in order to remain diversified, includes security.
And even over here in Seattle, which isn't too far away, it's like almost a 2-hour drive, depending on traffic. It could be way more. Because that little 2-lane I-5 that shows up out of nowhere is kind of terrifying under these train bridges. But up here, these teachers are actively I think they might still be on it, actually, on strike because they withheld multiple $1 million of worth of funding for mental health specifically.
Right.
Specifically for mental health. These things help. It's nice to have somebody to go talk to when you just got your ass whooped by your dad while your mom is too terrified to move. It's nice to have somebody to talk to. Maybe that talking could turn into some protecting, right? Some involvement. Maybe your mom doesn't know her worth or doesn't have the mental skills to protect herself. A lot of DV cases, depending on the situation, these and guys, it happens to guys too. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, it does.
I think it's 1 in 6, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 guys, I think, are the two standing numbers that I observed recently from an amazing speech by this lady called on Instagram called We the People. Yeah. Or sorry, We the Female. She's super awesome. I can't wait to have her on. But it's really terrifying to see how broken a human being can become due to somebody else's actions. And we've seen that happen when they become so broken that they fight back. A lot of times it doesn't just fight back with these kids because they don't have that hey, I'm going to respond to the problem in my life.
They don't
I'm
have
the
coping skills.
The coping skills. They're going to be increasingly destructive, and it does ultimately result in harming kids. And that could be something as simple as not taking your medicine if you have diabetes and you go into a different mental state. Something that bullying might affect you even more.
Right.
I'm not going to name schools, but that's a big issue. And especially when it comes into the kids with the firearms, it's just never a good thing. It really isn't. It's a
true recipe for massive destruction. And so again, like, I'm all for like the social services side of things and the programs to make sure that, like, after school programs are huge for kids, right? Like, we should be funding those. We should be funding them. Because that, like, after school programs are the only reason I'm probably not in prison. I was on that path. That was me. I was on the trajectory to go to prison. And so when I look at all that stuff, like, we have to have those things. But just like, no one really recommends that you not have a diversified stock portfolio, right? If you're into investing, no one tells you to just go dump all your money into Tesla. Well, that's super volatile and it's super risky. To go and do that, right? If you had $50,000, you wouldn't just go dump it all in Tesla stock, right? You would diversify that portfolio a little bit so that if Tesla goes bankrupt, you're not out everything. That's how I currently feel about our school shooter situation, is that here in Washington State, we are so focused only on trying to stop active shooters before they ever even become a thought that we're not actually doing anything to address what happens when one does come, though. So we're not diversified. We've thrown all of our eggs in one basket, and it's not a bad basket to be in, but we can diversify it a little bit. We can add in some security measures to make people feel safe in the meantime.
Absolutely. We definitely can. I know that training is a huge, important part of leadership. And I know you're very, very passionate about having more training based off our previous conversation. It's really important to know as a community member that your police officers and your sheriff's office is actively working to make sure that they can respond to things better, and that the people responding are in a good headspace as well, which requires being, level-headed, calm, cool, calm, collected, and having those that skill set to fall back on, because we never rise to the occasion. It takes a really rare, brave individual to respond to a situation and just rise to the occasion. Normally we fall to our level of training, especially when it comes to scary things. So that's why there's a reason I practice my concealed carry draw. There's a reason I practice putting tourniquets on. Yep. There's a reason the 10-year-old in my family knows how to put on a tourniquet better than most adults. There's first aid, how to talk to somebody if they look like they're having a bad day. Say hi to people when they walk by you. Small things can make the big difference. What does training look like in the future if you are to be elected?
So I'll first describe the current training that we have. I don't know what happened this year at the sheriff's office. We received almost no training. So we have our minimum mandatories, which is 2 hours of crisis training, I think, like de-escalation training that is online. It's like an online thing. Like it's terrible. It's terrible, man. Like,
so you don't actually interact with human beings doing the suicide prevention work.
Doing de-escalation training. Yeah, it's just on a computer. Dude, and it's a state minimum, right? So that's what we got. We got our 4-hour refresher course from the prosecutor, the DV prosecutor, which is great. It's not enough, but it's great. And then we have like what I call like our core training, right? So we have our 4 hours of defensive tactics training. That's what we got this year. 8 hours. So we got 8 hours of defensive tactic training. We got our 8 hours of driving training and firearms this year. We didn't even get firearms training. We got an open range day to show up when you could. So like they had open range, and I'm all for open range days, but we didn't even have a structured like, hey, today we're coming into firearms, which is crazy. I don't know why. The last few years, our firearms program has been like on the rise. Like we started bringing cars out onto the range and shooting out of cars, shooting into cars, using cars for cover, doing all sorts of cool stuff. Because
that stuff happens. You need these tools.
It's like 87% of law enforcement felonious gun assaults and homicides occur within like 10 feet of the car or something like that. So we started practicing shooting out of cars and so it's been, and so I don't know what happened this year. I really don't. So we did those 3 trainings right at the beginning of the year, and we haven't had training since. And I suspect it's a staffing issue again. But my big thing is that so for like those core training things, we use what we call in-service training, right? So we have deputies who are selected to be, for instance, firearms or driving or defensive tactics instructors, and we teach ourselves basically. And I'm okay with that to an extent. I think those positions are good. They're good for morale. They're good for people to take like ownership of a program. However, one thing I don't like about the idea of in-service training is that if that's all you do, then you never diversify your thought. You never diversify your training. And so my goal as sheriff is going to be to involve more community trainers. There are tons of people that we can reach out to. And you know what? Not all of them are going to be comfortable. I'm personally interested in bringing in the family member of someone who died from police brutality to come talk for 2 hours. I'm interested in bringing in, a deputy who has run into a school shooting and had to take a life before. That person, that should be our active shooter training. Right? Like, because at the end of the day, our active shooter training stuff, like you can simulate it all you want. Dude, I don't know if enough training can overcome fear. I don't know. I don't think it can. I think when it comes to people running into buildings by themselves, that you either have it or you don't. You're either willing to die right here, right now for this cause, or you're not. And you're going to
put hand sanitizer on your hand.
Correct.
While the gunshots are going off.
Dude, I'm telling you, man, like I don't think, and that's a perfect example. So how much training and experience do you think was in that school?
Well, I know that the Uvalde Police Department, I think it was 3. I read an article that the police were even brought this up, and a lot of different organizations criticized them. I think it was like 3 months or something like that. The FBI active shooter prevention team came out and did the training, and there's also a training facility for active shooter prevention for the state of Texas, right, less than an hour away. In Texas, there's also Sheepdog Response, the organization itself, which is so that I've gone through. And Sheepdog Response actually came out recently. I don't know if you guys got the memo or not. They came out and they had a law enforcement only class, where these are former Green Berets, former Navy
Yeah.
SEALs, former people who dealt with doing violence to people who need it done to them occupationally for years, and they've been in the kicking down doors. They've been covered in sand, covered in their friends' blood, and had to keep pushing through. They know what it takes to push through in a situation, and they give you the tools to do it. And I was at this training as a civilian with a lot of the King County Sheriff's deputies. Multiple of them were on SWAT.
Yeah.
Multiple of them. There's a lot of different resources out there, and in Texas, there's so many shooting instructors and resources, and there's literally no reason why any of those people, any of those officers, could not have gone to that training if the leadership made the right decision and prioritized training, because nobody can be ready to overcome fear unless they're given the tools to do it.
Yeah, and you look at Uvalde, right? Like, how many decades of law enforcement experience and training were in that building at the time the shooting was going on? A lot of cops were in there. And even with strength of numbers, even with training, even with experience, no one went in.
And shields,
tools.
They're in it's in the back of your patrol vehicle.
Ballistic helmets, right? I mean, when I responded to an active shooter, we got one my first year here. I was brand new. And we got a call that shots were going off at one of our state buildings. And I'm like, this is it, right? Like, and I was one of the first units on scene, state patrols piling in. And it was cool to see the response here locally, because you've got such a diversified group of law enforcement officials. You got FBI, you've got so FBI is showing up and throwing their gear on. And me and my sergeant ran in, right? And I didn't have half the stuff that they had on that at that Uvalde incident, right? I'm looking at guys who have level 3 plate carriers, multiple magazines, and they've got ballistic helmets. I'm like, I grabbed my crappy department Olympic Arms AR-15 and ran in there. And so this idea that if you get enough equipment, you'll be brave. I don't see it. You either have it or you don't. And in law enforcement, we see it amongst ourselves, right? I mean, people talk. They become, when things hit the fan really badly here in law enforcement, we remember the ones who kind of like sat in the back and held a flashlight over our heads so that we could see better and didn't get involved, right? We're in knockdown, drag out fights, and it's
someone that's gonna be able to pull you to safety when you're taking rounds and you're bleeding, and you need them to instruct you to put pressure on your wound when they don't have the time to stop shooting stop assaulting and trying to stop the threat, because we shoot to stop the threat, right? Everybody knows that if you're a responsible gun owner, that should be the first thing you learn. First, what not to do. Never keep. Also paying attention to your third sight pictures, what behind you, because you could be moving at different levels. All these things are things that we really need to make sure our law enforcement have the tools to cover. When you're changing levels, look behind you before you stand up, so you don't stand up at anybody's. Don't stand up and you'll get blasted. Hide behind the engine block, not behind a window.
In the K9 Arlo shooting, I almost shot my partner because he stood up right as I pressed out to take a shot at our suspect. And he stood up and his head hit my barrel. He backed up and pushed my barrel back into me as I was basically pulling the slack out of the trigger, right? And so these are the things. But my big thing, because listen, I'm not the most decorated person in the world, but I'll tell you what, I've ran into buildings where I thought I was going to confront an active shooter. I'm a Medal of Valor recipient. I ran into a burning building and rescued a paraplegic wheelbound chairwoman from her house.
Wow.
I've done some things in my career. I'll tell you, we went to a call one time where you suspected a hostage situation and an ambush. And I remember feeling the fear. Going into the active shooter with my sergeant, I was hyped up, but I wasn't fearful. I remember being with one other deputy on a call where we're clearing a house looking for a female who was screaming, and we suspected there was basically a firearm hostage situation, and that there was going to basically be a booby trap for her. They were going to ambush us. And I remember clearing that last room and feeling terrified. Like that was the first time in my career. And I'd been shot at prior to that. I'd had someone at a domestic violence call shoot rounds at me through a wall. Had no idea where the rounds were coming. You feel them skipping past you and shit. And I just remember being so terrified of this last room. Right, we know they're in there. We know they're in there, and like I might get shot. I might actually get shot. And we could have backed out and called the SWAT team and just held perimeter for 45 minutes until the SWAT team got there, and then deployed a robot and got a drone up, and we kicked the door in anyways, and went in there and took care of business. But
it takes true bravery to combat.
I remember that fear, right? You get confronted with this fear, and it has to be momentary. And if you, because no one in these situations, no one sits there, and if you have to think about it for more than 10 seconds, you're toast. You're done. Right? Like the fear thing, it hits you, and you're either moving forward or you're going back. I've just never really seen someone sit there in the corner, and after like 10 minutes, like, okay, now I can do it. It's not how that works. Like, this stuff it's rapidly evolving, and you either have it or you don't. And so going into this stuff, like, I'm pretty confident, but the only reason I'm confident in all this stuff, and it's something that I don't think people do enough, is that I'm a firm believer that the body cannot go where the mind has not already been. If you have not thought of these situations ahead of time, right? Because I've already thought of the burning building situation 1,000 times before I ran into one. And a lot of it has to do with self-preservation, right? Like, how bad of a building am I going to run into, right? I'm not going in there to pull out a corpse. I'm not going to go in there to die for no reason. But you have to put these thoughts in your mind of like, okay, but if half the house is on fire and the victim might be in the house, the half that's not, like, can I get in there? Can I actually do something where I'm not just going to be a victim myself? Can I run into this last door where I'm pretty sure someone's on the other side with a gun? Can I get in there? And if you haven't been there mentally ahead of time, you're going to go into shock when you see it for the first time.
And you never know what you're going to walk into. I mean, no. Nobody wants to walk into a room and see a dead child. I know me being in an active shooter environment, unarmed, was a memory that's going to stick with me forever, and I'm never going to ever put myself in a position where I can't defend myself or my family again, or I can't be a false multiplier to Leos as they arrive on scene. And I've backed up a cop before, in like a few times. I've stepped in, whether it was armed or unarmed. It didn't really matter to me. It's important to, if you are someone who does carry concealed, you are able and willing to defend yourself and the ones around you in your community within within what your little operating area. You don't go out of your way to get involved in violent situations. It's not fun. There's nothing fun about it, and it really is terrifying. Anyone who
I really don't like violence.
Yeah,
I don't like violence. I don't like fighting people. I really like DT. For me is like, I do it. I got no problem. I'll get down on the ground and roll around. But like, my whole thing when I'm out doing my job every night is like, that should be a last resort. Like, your words are how you deal with people, right?
100%.
Like, and I've been able to talk myself out of more situations that I've fought myself out of.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
That's huge. That's huge for law enforcement, right? It's what the community wants these days anyways. Like, the days of just beating people with batons, long gone.
Yeah, long and that gone. Doesn't really help the community relations when someone's on the receiving end of your judo. Baton.
It's verbal judo and diffusing things before they get there, and also knowing, like, is this even worth it? Right? Like, we have to weigh those things ahead of time. Is this really worth the ultimate goal of public safety, and how does it impact that?
100%. I like the conscious effort to over that last piece as well. Practicing and training and stuff like that is pretty simple for me and my family and my friends who are Leos, and especially the firefighters. Practice not dying. If you're too physically debilitated to perform your duties, to serve your community, you're not going to do a good job of it. And if you're too physically debilitated to walk up some stairs with your FFE on and your full kit and your loadout, you're going to be in trouble. And that also applies to having to gear up. Do you practice putting on all your gear in emergency situations outside of your daily activities?
Yeah, a little bit, but not too often. Just because, I'm pretty quick at it. As far as getting gear on and stuff, I've had to do it before. And so I carry my vest with me everywhere I go, in my patrol car. So I conceal carry everywhere, on duty, off duty. Even if I'm just going to training, the vest is sitting right next to me in the car. It's all ready to go as if I'm on duty anyways. So I never want to get caught with my pants down. You know what I mean? Like, you always have to be ready for this stuff. And, I'm also pretty hyper vigilant now. I'm a candidate. And so, I don't want anyone to do anything crazy to me. And so, I try to.
It does happen.
Yeah, it does. It does. But, so far the community has been super supportive, and I haven't run it. I mean, you run into opposition, but it's mostly just because when you go against a 3-time incumbent who's been doing the job forever, he's built a lot of relationships. He's got a lot of friendships in the county, and so that's been the bigger pushback. But man, the polls are speaking right now. So
yes, they are, and I hope they continue to speak. One last question, man.
yeah,
What is one thing you would say to somebody who's still on the fence about whether they should vote for you, or for people that are outside of your area that you're willing to be elected as? So people like me, what would you say to me to make me believe in your message? Other than, obviously, because I already believe in it. Anyone who I
yeah,
think you got to be ridiculous not to believe in what you're saying. It's pretty
yeah,
level minded.
yeah.
What would you say to us?
Well, what I would say is, how long do you want the older generation to stick around? Everyone demands this change, but when we actually look at going to these elections, we'll vote out a 60-year-old incumbent who's been in office for 30 years, and we'll replace them with a 57-year-old who's been in some other form of office for 30 years. And so the question is how fresh do you want to get, right? Like, how innovative do you really want to get with this stuff? Because that is why change is so slow, is that anytime a young candidate like myself decides that, I'm going to throw it all out there, like I'll run for office, they just get destroyed with age. Well, you're so young, you're so inexperienced. And my question for you, because that's a great argument, right? Like, my opponent has 30 years of law enforcement experience. I have 6 commissioned, 8 total. So he's got almost 4 times as much experience. My question for that is, when you look around your community, what has that offered you? All that experience, and yet Thurston County's had like 7 shootings in the last 2 weeks. So all that experience, all that time, and we're experiencing the same thing we've always been given. So if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a safe candidate, if you're looking for one who's not very outspoken, one who just kind of rolls with the punches, and when things get bad, they just get bad with it. And when things are good, well, things are great right now. I can steer the ship. The sea's calm right now. I can steer it great. If that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for a safe candidate, then I would say don't vote for me. Because I am a risk. You're taking a gamble with me. You're taking a gamble on a 29-year-old deputy with only 8 years of experience in law enforcement, who wants to see change personally, who has a vested interest in like being tired of old school politics, tired of the way that prior generations have done things, and looking to try new things. If you're looking for that, if you're looking for someone who's going to step up and really try to impact some change locally, well, then you've got a shot come November. You have to vote for change. You can't just wish it.
You definitely cannot just wish it. And I would say to people who talk about you're so young and young. Yeah, a lot comes with youth.
Yes.
Humility, understanding, new information, not doing the same thing. It all kind of ties in. And I think it's really great when people do go against the tide and power through and say, I'm going to try something new. So there you have it, man. If you're listening and you're in Thurston County, you know everything that you need to know about why your vote matters and why you need to start instituting some change. So I think, Derek, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. I love your message. I think this is something super powerful, and I really, really am down with it. Anything I can do to support you and your message, please let me know. I'm going to make sure that word gets spread across all the platforms. And
really appreciate
I'll be sure to pass on any feedback I get to you as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on here. And again, it's good just to be able to talk about this stuff and try to get it out there, right? I mean, a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people don't know what the sheriff does. No idea what their elected sheriff does in an 8-hour workday.
I know what Adam Fortney does up in this thing up here. Yes, Lord.
Yep. And again,
we're deploying spike strips.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That is a working sheriff, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a guy that even if you were looking at the sheriff's office and you saw they don't pay as much as Everett, you'd say, yeah, but like Adam Fortney, man, like that's a sheriff I want to work for him. Mm-hmm. I might need to work for Everett Police Department because they pay better, but I want to work for that sheriff. And that's all I'm trying to do here at Thurston County.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I honestly do appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
We spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about mental health, but I want to talk about physical health for a second. There's nothing more uplifting and confidence boosting than looking in the mirror and seeing exactly what you want looking back at you. The person I trust to make sure that's happening, no matter if I'm going through an injury or not, is Brian Click. He's my friend, mentor, coach, and now one of our sponsors here at Off the Deep End. Head over to the link in the description and check out why I choose him. All over his Instagram and his website, you will be seeing the different clients who've worked with him in the past, whether it's bodybuilding or just maintaining a healthy lifestyle or working towards a certain goal in a sport and making sure you make weight. Brian is a guy I trust for every single different category and facet that fitness surrounds. There's nothing more important than liking what you see in the mirror and liking how you feel when you wake up every day. So head over to his website and get this process started.